Welcome back, everybody. Nick, how you doing?
I'm all right.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Obviously, we were in Tahoe,
Mm-hmm.
if anybody saw the gram.
Oh, yeah.
But we're back, first day of work, under your belt. It's a rough start, rough just easing back into it after a week off.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because I feel like I like the routine, but you love the vacation at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, on vacation, it's hard to maintain that routine.
Yeah,
And so getting back into, like, a workflow is kind of nice,
it is.
but it sucks at the same time.
Yeah. It's not what you want to be doing, but people have obligations that they have to complete. So, yeah, it's good to get back into that steady flow of your routine. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, how are you doing?
Good. Had a pretty straightforward day at work. Wasn't too complicated, which was nice. So tomorrow I'll feel right back in the swing of things. And if anything goes wild, I'll be ready.
Boom.
Boom.
So, Brendan, we're going to be discussing some attunement today.
That's right.
Can
you want to tell everybody who our guests were?
Oh, yes, I will. So our guests were Edward Brodkin and Ashley Pallathra. They co-authored this book called Missing Each Other, How to Cultivate Meaningful Connections. It's all about attunement. Dr. Brodkin's a professor of psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania, and Ashley Pallathra is actually a doctoral student in clinical psych right now. She's obtaining her PhD. She's going to be heading off to her internship this upcoming year. So her last year of finishing her PhD. And yeah, it was great to talk to both of them. I think that this book offers a lot of insights that are very practical that have not been discussed very often. And just like the different ways that we can attune to others and how we're missing that today has been so helpful to kind of learn more about and really name. So yeah, Brendan, was there anything that kind of sticks out to you from our conversation or anything that got you thinking?
Two things. One was we kind of talked about at the end there, Ted mentioned it, but how this maybe can be integrated into the workplace, I think is a really good conversation, especially being on the HR side of the house myself. I think that it's a very important and delicate thing to navigate. So I kind of was thinking about that a little bit. The other thing I was thinking about was where maybe could the attunement piece show up in people's day-to-day lives rather than a self-guided process, maybe potentially as a coaching opportunity, like in schools, like teachers coaching two students through this, right? Or, maybe that's a workplace as a manager being keen to these ideas and being able to help facilitate a conversation between coworkers. I kind of think that might be a really practical way of thinking about this, is because it's hard, right, to do some of this stuff by yourself and to be self-aware enough to realize them when they're happening if you haven't been like thoroughly walked through some of the principles and the philosophies and the pillars that we talked about. But I think there's a case for coaching people through these things together, like live, as they're maybe unfolding, to really help them really like grab a hold of you as you're navigating a conversation. So that's kind of what's been on my mind. What about you?
I mean, I like that. I don't think I really, like, my mind didn't take me to that place of really putting this into schools, but I really enjoy that because as a student growing up, you're just told that you need to be able to pay attention, sit still and listen. And yeah, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to actually pay attention to somebody and connect with what they're saying? Because there are plenty of times that I've just sat, still today, that I just sit and listen and it's not registering to me at all because I don't feel properly attuned to the person or what's going on.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sorry, Nick's going to jump off and fix some IT thing really quick. But it's a good point. And I think something welcome back. I think something worth thinking about too in that same conversation is something that I think about a lot is like, how are we setting up schools to treat kids? I feel like there's this factory of knowledge sense that we kind of get with the school system. It's like checking boxes and pushing people through, so that you can like pump out college attendees or just graduates in general.
Yeah.
I think that's like the priority. And man, like on all levels, and what this book really like suggests itself towards is treating people like people, and like respecting them where they are and meeting them where they are, or not necessarily, meeting them where they are. And sometimes that means you stepping further than where you are, in a sense. Like you and I could have very different places of where we stand on like the scale, right? So like, let's say, for example, I was like a really low emotional intelligence, I'll call it, just for the sake of conversation. And like, I wasn't very attuned with people, but you were highly attuned, and you would be taking a much bigger step than I would to like because it's harder for me, right? I don't have that comfort level if I'm not really picking up on cues and everything like that. So there's more demand put on you because you have the higher capacity for engaging in an in-tune conversation. And I feel like that type of like kind of meeting everybody where they're at and like providing, that's like what the idea of equity is, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's not about giving everybody the same. It's about getting everybody what that person needs. I think that there's the school system and the way the book kind of tied all of the different dynamics of having these conversations and finding attunement with people. I just think there's a missing conversation there, and kids are obviously suffering from this the most.
Yeah. And I think that the idea of the reciprocity piece in attuning with somebody should be better understood or better explained as well. Like as a child, it shouldn't just be that you need to listen and understand the information, but it should be that by you listening more and engaging with this material, you're going to get more out of it. And also the teacher is going to probably want to teach the material more, and vice versa. If the teacher's passionate about what they're teaching, and if they can engage these students, whoever they're teaching, it's going to be that reciprocal process of growth on either end.
Right.
Instead of just being one-to-one, that like, I speak to you, you listen, so be it.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And I think, like you're saying too, I think in the workplace, that can be so transformative, right? Like if we can actually be attuned to people instead of feel like we're just getting directives all the time, like that is going to be a difference, just another step in this process of really trying to empathize with somebody and care for somebody, because we're all human.
Yeah. And I think, in that sense too, something that's not very done, like, I feel like a lot of times good businesses, and especially in a smaller business where the owner leader can kind of like foster a culture and a community that they want to, I think they do a really good job of creating a personality within the business in a sense. And by doing that, I think it really effectively, to all levels of employees, communicates what it means to be an employee there, and like what, maybe benefits you get as an employee, both like tangible physical benefits, but also like social emotional benefits. And when a company can't create that like personality of the business, or doesn't communicate it to the lower employees, like when that culture stays within like the executive level or the management level, it creates like a very us versus them kind of atmosphere. And I think if a company was really attuned with their employees, they would be over communicating business facts and health and like agendas, and it wouldn't feel so suspicious and like this like room that you don't get to sit in, like this club of people who are in the same business as you, but they have a completely different perspective of the business than you. You know what I mean? I think that's a very like, it's cause for separation amongst employees and management, which makes bad company culture. So I think, to say it again, I think an attuned company understands how to communicate to all levels of employees to make sure that they understand the state of the company and where their value is as an employee, and is just transparent in that sense. And I feel like a lot of times that's either people feel like like the lower employees like wouldn't understand, or they're not smart enough to get why we're making these decisions, or they just don't need to be concerned with those things. And it's like, this is their life. They're going to spend so much of their life here. Don't be like the parent who keeps all these secrets and like moseys around the house with like out telling their kids what's going on. They know there's something wrong.
Yeah.
You don't have to like keep a secret or be suspicious or be shady or whatever it is.
Wow. I really like the comparison to like a family dynamic.
Yeah.
Because it essentially is the same thing. Like that is like, I mean, that full transparency thing within a company, very challenging, right? And it's like weird because it's going to be different in different sizes of companies and how they kind of go about that. But yeah, like if you're going to be committing 40 hours a week, probably more, to something, like you probably should know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if your company can't communicate that to you, like that's just not, this attunement piece is lacking. And that's really a huge piece of like defining meaning and purpose in people's lives that we're not communicating or showing. And that can be super problematic, I feel.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that a lot of that is reality. There's a study from the book that I wanted to read to you.
Rip it.
That they quoted, and just get your reaction. So the book says, in a 2018 survey conducted by the health insurance company Cigna, more than 20,008 American adults were asked to fill out the UCLA Loneliness Scale questionnaire. 54% of adults surveyed that they sometimes or always feel that no one really knows them well. 39% said that they sometimes or always feel that they are no longer close to anyone. And 27% rarely or never feel as though they are people who really understand them. Levels of loneliness were found to be highest in young adults, with 68% of Generation Zers, those who are now ages 18 to 22, feeling that no one really knows them well. And then they discuss how they're writing this book during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that there are additional spikes in loneliness due to quarantine and social distancing.
My mind immediately goes to like having more questions. Like, I love surveys, but I love also understanding the context. And I think there's an additional survey to go along with that one that could be really telling to like compare and contrast data of how many people truly feel like they know who they are. And is there a correlation between not really feeling like you've got a solid grasp of who you are yourself and what you think other people think of you? You know, because I'm hard to just like jump in right away and say like, yes, in the 21st century, like connection is down because of like social media and whatever. I think there's definitely truth to that. There's no doubt there's truth to that. But I'm curious if like, I've been really stuck on this idea lately, and I think I've brought it up on a few other things, that like people aren't able to properly tease out their own personalities and their own like, and express themselves in ways, because when they attempt to do it online, there's like this assumption that like the minute you step online, like that's who you are and you're accepted as that. Whereas I think psychology, you know, from my understanding, does kind of show us that we go out into the world and we test certain pieces of our personality in the real world, and we get real feedback from that. And that kind of helps refine who we are. Yeah. And I wonder if that could be more of the lack. You know what I mean? So then like, yeah, nobody knows you because you don't know who you are yourself. And if you don't know who you are, then even if somebody thinks they know who you are based on the way you act, you're going to think that's garbage and that they're not going to know you. So you're going to constantly be reinforcing this narrative within yourself of they don't know me, but you don't know you because you haven't finished putting yourself together in a sense.
Yeah. And that's expected in like young adults and late adolescents.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's a piece of that. And I think, potentially social misdiagnosis of a lack of, close relationships and bonds due to social media could be giving people an answer that they're looking for that's incorrect. They're looking for, why don't people know me? What's going on here? Why aren't I connecting with people? Why, whatever it is. And like, I just think that like there's people who have made great connections with people and have fantastic relationships and have a super healthy social, footprint. It can't just be that. You know what I mean?
You make a good point with that.
So where do people start to like budget their time better to really make sure that they're getting plenty of face-to-face interaction to go along with their social, because it's a very different type of feedback. I love the comparison of movie stars, like child stars, and like this idea of like a lot of them get into this like because they want the admiration and the love and like all of this, but then you see so many of them like crumble because they come to the conclusion that like all of the admiration and all of the love that they feel is based on a role they played that's not really even them. And they can't handle it when they realize that like, oh wow, all of these people say that they love me, but nobody even really knows me because I'm only so-and-so from the show I was in, or I'm so-and-so from, all of these other things. And it's not normal.
No. Yeah.
So there's like a huge like personality development blockage, I think, that's like kind of been thrown out there. And I think it's being misrepresented by like lack of human connection.
Yeah. To
a small degree. I don't want to say that I'm saying that for everything.
Yeah. But it's definitely a big piece. But yeah, we've talked about the idea of cognitive dissonance like multiple times in several different contexts, but God, it's so present here with like, I'm socially connecting with so many people on social media. Like, why am I having a hard time connecting with others in real life?
Right.
Like, that does not fit, and those don't go in our minds well. And so if we do experience like a negative interaction with somebody face to face, we'll be like, okay, well, I'm just going to turn back to social media, get some praise, and then we're just going to keep this cycle going. And that's messed up. And it's really sad because like older generations don't know how to go about social media. Younger generations are hopping all over it. Like, I definitely look back at some things that I've like said or done on social media, and I'm like, wow, like what was I thinking? And especially as like such a young kid that I was exposed to this platform, like it didn't make sense to me why my parents were telling me like, no, we don't want you on this. I was like, come on, everybody's doing it. Like, let me on this thing. I'm gonna look like an idiot if I don't get on here. Yeah. But now I'm like, Jesus.
Well, and there's a real case for like letting kids have access. You know what I mean? Like, I was listening to a podcast today, the Joe Rogan, Quentin Tarantino one, and he was talking about how kids who grew up in the 70s looked at the kids in the 80s and were like, you didn't have our music. You didn't have any of that. But then those kids were like, yeah, but you didn't have TV. And we had all these morning cartoons. I think it was actually 60s and 70s. And it was like, yeah, we had morning cartoons. And like people were not sitting around the radio anymore. Like we were doing something different. And that was what defined their childhood. So like every generation has this like way that they tap into pop culture in their own way. And like maybe it's like the hot music because like the radio, and that's what that was popular, but then you get TV and all of a sudden you've got all these different personalities. People redo entertainment for a visual platform, and all of a sudden it's a whole new type of thing. So you can't cut a child off from their generation's pop culture.
Right.
So I think that's like where it's really important to find a balance. And like, I think honestly, it's like the hardest thing to figure out, but like screen time, like I think that's not the Apple built-in iPhone feature, but like a lot of parents say like have their kids ask them if they can have screen time right now. Like, which is very different than like you're out, you hand your kid the iPad to keep them quiet, right? Like that's probably reinforcing like a negative.
Whereas shut up.
Earned screen time is probably the positive way of doing it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. Like I think you have to let kids on it. But then again, like this is the new platform for predators, right? Like for child predators. And like that's a real thing that has to be considered. I think there was some stat I heard, like, and I'm going to probably misquote this, but it was ridiculous. And it's pretty close to what I'm going to say. So it's not like I'm throwing out a wild number, but something like 700,000 kids in the United States a year go missing. It's something wild.
Wow.
And like, I just can't even imagine, like almost 750,000 children in the United States. It's a wild number. It blew my mind when I heard it.
Where'd you hear this?
I was listening to another podcast who was talking about this very issue, social media, and how it's become the platform for people specifically with like, you know, profiles reaching out to young kids and like the child pornography thing and saying like they'll Venmo them money. You know, if a kid has a Venmo and a social media, like there's a lot of bad stuff they can get into.
Yeah.
So like and it's like how this one town was like experiencing this unusually high solicitation through social media of a bunch of kids at the same school. And like kids were like, hey, there's money in this, like reach out to this profile. Like if you want to get money, you just have to do a small thing. And like, it just gets out of control. These kids who are like, don't really understand what they're doing. They're being preyed on by people.
Yeah.
And it's a staggering, and like, this is how abductions are happening now, right? Like, hey, we're meeting a group of girls at the mall, when really they think they're meeting two boys their age at the mall. But those boys aren't even, like, they're telling a lie to their parents so they can go, but the people on social media are telling lies to them to get them to the mall. And then they get picked up by in a van and like driven somewhere, and kids are just going missing all the time.
Wow. That's crazy.
That's I feel pretty confident that number is legit. And I'm not saying that like they go unfound, and I'm not like, I don't know what the full like depth of that statistic is, but regardless, 700,000 children at some point or another are just going missing in the United States. That's wild to think about.
That is so sad to think about.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, social media is a dicey one. And like this whole book is about establishing a solid foundation. In my opinion, it's about establishing a solid foundation of person-to-person communication to like formulate quality relationships. That's my, cliff notes of like, if you want to know what this book's about.
Yeah.
Because this idea of missing each other is a really serious issue that we're experiencing. There's too many people going through their daily lives right next to people that they never speak to and they don't even know. And like, it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
And we're missing it.
Well, and they're writing this book for a reason. Like, relationships are paramount to our health.
Yeah.
And it's crazy that I feel like I haven't read a book like this before.
Yeah. That's
outside of like clinical psychology, I'll say.
Yeah.
That's just written for the normal reader.
Yeah.
And so, kind of to wrap up, Brennan, I wanted to ask you, reflecting on how you think you attune with others. Where do you think you're at? Where are some areas that you feel like you want to grow still? And what are maybe some of your strengths?
Okay, so one thing I've been very conscious of that is like it's like a constant, like, okay, I catch myself doing it, but I think it's a exemplar of a lack of attunement in some situations, is thinking that certain things are so simple that everybody must get them, and not allowing somebody to be, and it's not all the time, it's not for everything, but like, if I really think like, man, somebody, they should have known that. Okay, well, it's not their fault that they don't know it, right? So I think checking my initial response being like, how do you not know that? Or like, why is this a shock to you? Or were you not paying attention? Or like that kind of a reaction. I think really just trying to like slow the process down and be like, and like thinking, how could this maybe like, how could that maybe be the case? And then like kind of showing that empathy and taking it as like an opportunity to like, help somebody else like in their perspective. I think that's it's not a common thing that I do, but I definitely catch myself doing it. And I think it's a lack of attunement in those moments that I do it. All in all, I think I do a fairly decent job being attuned with others. I don't try and like I try not to assume too much. Obviously, like the description I just gave, like I definitely do it. I make assumptions and like I jump to conclusions, and I feel like things that I learned so young even could like is a good way of maybe saying it, that other people just never learned. I'm like, wow, like just some people, like things that you think are obvious, they just, I mean, like obvious to who?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
because then they'll have things that are obvious that maybe you won't know about too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then I'll have, everybody's got blind spots in stuff, everything, everybody. So, just, not getting on people's cases for their blind spots and hoping that people will do the same for you.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I feel like I really do make a conscious effort to make sure that nobody is like, even in those cases, like that nobody feels like they're like not knowing was a bad thing. You know what I mean? It's okay to not know stuff. Like I think everybody doesn't know stuff. Like there's an infinite number of things to know.
Yeah.
So like we all don't know stuff. Yeah. I was going somewhere, but I forgot.
I think those were good things to be mindful of. I think it's easy to like also an added layer, which I think goes on top of what you're saying is, like thinking that somebody else knows what you know, but also thinking that they interpreted it the same way.
That's a good point.
Right? Like, thinking that they have the same definition for what your thought or what your takeaway is for that.
Yeah.
And that could be very different too. And I think that could be challenging sometimes. So trying to stay open to that.
Yeah. And man, like what a great experience it has been for myself to know people who've lived different experience. You know what I mean? Like, man, I can't even begin to describe the, if you just take our general demographic, socioeconomic status that we like exist in, man, that's a small percentage of the human experience. You know what I mean? So like talking and engaging with people who have had such different experience, live such different lives, and like, man, it's really easy to find out that like your life's been cushy in a way. You know what I mean? It's really easy to be appreciative of the things that you have. But yeah, it's not in every moment are we going to realize like to think like maybe this person's been through something that I don't understand. But I think that's maybe one of the goals of the books and like finding meaningful connection. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Going into every conversation thinking that you're going to learn something. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But it is hard and it's tiring. I think that's part of what my struggle can be sometimes is like exhaustion. And I think we could riff on like Zoom fatigue for a super long time, but we've done that somewhat. So, and I know everybody can probably relate to that in some extent. But I think exhaustion is something that impacts a lot of people's relationships. You go through a whole day of work, and then you need to try to connect with maybe family or spouse or friends, and the level of energy might just not be there sometimes. And it can come off in many different ways if it's not communicated properly.
Yeah. You don't know, even the happiest person you can imagine that and you can imagine having a conversation with, you don't know when they're having an off day. And if you feel like they are, it's also important to not pretend like you know what that off day could be caused by. It could just be tired. It could be something really shitty. But like you said, you're going to learn something in those situations. So approach it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And being, I think, transparent in that. Like, I think that's been a learning curve for me, is like telling people that, hey, like, I'm just feeling off. Like, or I'm super dead right now. Like, maybe we can talk in a little bit, but right now I'm just depleted. And I don't like doing that, because I feel like I'm letting people down to a certain extent. I feel like they're ready and I'm not. And that feels uncomfortable to me.
There's like a self-pressure that people put on themselves to like be able to deliver in the way that they think is being expected of them.
Yeah.
And that's like, it's a very strange like dynamic when somebody gets into that position, and how much they will fight listening to themselves. You know, like trusting themselves to say, hey, I'm not feeling it. I'm really sorry. Like, we got to do this another time. Or like, can we talk in 30 minutes? Like, it's so many times people will think that pushing past and like giving it their best in the moment and like not wanting to let people down is what's best. But I mean, how many times could you probably have rethought of times like, let's reschedule, and you would have been better if you just rescheduled, right? Like you could have given them a better version of you if you had just given yourself the time before.
Yeah. Or even like thinking back, like, man, I probably was not showing up the best.
Oh yeah.
Like, and maybe it's still great that I showed up and it was beneficial. But yeah, what did that mean for me? Boundaries are hard. Yeah. Boundaries are really tough.
Yeah.
And I think, again, boundaries don't get talked about. No. They're like, oh, you need to figure that shit out while you're in a relationship with somebody, or like just connecting with other people or friends. Like, you need to kind of learn what is good and what is right. But
I really like the idea of just, man, and I'm going to bring up the whole like Jordan Peterson talks I've been listening to, and this can maybe cap off our, we'll send the people off with this little message, but just the idea of, you know, it's really easy to just bottle shit up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But to like be in an interaction with somebody and like the idea of extending the best version of yourself towards like offering the best version of yourself to that person in the hopes that you're going to get the best of them in return. And in a lot of ways that means like just having the hard conversation, because your openness and vulnerability will hopefully return openness and vulnerability. And through that and an attuned conversation, you can like reach a more legitimate outcome that doesn't end in like a, let's just table this for now. And you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, those are never productive, because then things just sit and fester and you never talk about them again. Like, they never come back up. So, not letting stuff sit like that. I think that's I think that's good advice. And I like, that's a description that I've heard multiple times for like what faith is, right? It's just putting the best version of you out there with the faith that it will be returned back to you if you do so.
Yeah, I like that. And to add a layer to it, I think that expressing it and not letting stuff fester, we've discussed this before, but it can be done in separate ways of like, maybe it's not directly addressing the problem with the person, but like you can still express yourself by like a journal. You can do something outside of that to where you can start to continue that process if it doesn't feel safe in that moment still. And I heard something, like most people say, like sleep on it, it'll be okay. And some people say don't go to bed angry, like ever. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer.
Yeah, I don't
I
think
think
so either.
both apply in different contexts, but I think even just like starting to work through things in your mind, knowing that you're going to address these things again is important, at least.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Brendan.
All right.
Well, we're back in the Bay.
That's right.
Back on office hours, and we're going to have a new episode next week.
Boom.
So thanks for listening today. We hope you enjoyed this past episode. We think that this is such an important topic. And if you have thoughts about this topic that you wanted to share with us, please comment or do anything, because we would love to get some interaction to where we can kind of get a sense of where our listeners are at and what the thoughts are.
Yeah. And here's an interesting thought. If we posted, and this is a question for anybody listening who may like this idea. If we posted the subject and the topic that we were going to be talking about on a future episode, and we could work some like audience listener questions into our conversation, would people be interested in that? If we posed that, if we told everybody that one of our next conversations was going to be about another evolutionary psych, and we were going to talk about procreation and its impact on social psychology, would people have questions? I'm putting it out there. Send them in.
Yeah, slide in the DMs.
All right. We'll catch you next time.
See you, everyone.